This happened about 14 years ago, back when I was 12 and living on the east side of the Australian rainforest. Our house sat on a 40-acre property surrounded by thick bushland. It wasn't some cozy countryside home either. It was pretty isolated. The property belonged to a Swiss man named Hans, who'd come by once in a while with his tractor to cut down the tall grass around our place. That was important, especially in summer, because if you know anything about Australia, it's that we have a lot of creatures that can kill you if you're not careful. We lived about 40 minutes away from the nearest town. If you needed groceries, medical help, or even just to call someone while you were out, it took a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house was built about 3/4 of the way up a mountain, and most of the land around it was filled with steep hills, gullies, and hidden corners. There were trails that led to a small stream and a waterfall about 5 or 6 meters high. It was beautiful in a wild sort of way, but to a kid, it could be kind of unnerving, especially at night when every sound from the bush echoed through the valley. It was me, my younger brother, and my sister living there with our parents. The nearest neighbors were about a 10-minute drive away in either direction. On one side was an older lady who always waved when we got off the school bus. I think my parents had asked her to keep an eye on us since she could see the main road. On the other side was a middle-aged man who lived with his family. He wasn't exactly friendly. He used to dig around near the bottom edge of our property, which messed with the water flow from our stream. Living that far out, we didn't get many visitors. If someone came down our long dirt driveway, it usually meant they were lost. So when a man in a dusty ute came roaring down one afternoon, it got my attention. I ran inside and told my dad that some stranger had pulled in. My dad went straight outside while my mom told us to stay inside. Now, my dad wasn't the kind of guy anyone wanted to mess with. He'd lost one of his legs years before in a motorcycle accident, something that apparently happened while he was running from the cops. Before that, he'd served in the Navy and grown up in one of the rougher parts of Sydney. He was tough as nails, and even though he was strict, he always kept us safe. So when he stepped outside to deal with the man, there was no hesitation in his voice. The guy had a big red dog in the back of his ute, a German Shepherd mix. The dog growled, but went quiet when the man told it to. My dad stood there, waiting for him to speak. "Hi, my name's John," the man said in this weirdly smooth, friendly tone, like he was used to convincing people to like him. My dad wasn't impressed. He just said, "So what are you doing here then, John?" I couldn't hear every word, but I could tell from my dad's voice that he was getting irritated. Eventually, I heard him say, "What the hell are you thinking? Just call the cops." Later, I found out what that was about. The old lady next door had passed away, and this man said he was the one who found her. He'd asked my dad if they should move her body to make it easier for the police. That's when my dad told him to call the cops right away and not touch anything. When the police finally came, both my dad and John gave statements. They said it looked like she'd died naturally. But after the officers left, John stayed at our house. He acted too comfortable, like he belonged there, and I couldn't stand the way he smiled. That night, while my parents sat at the table talking with him, he started playing songs on his guitar. I remember being annoyed because it was a school night, and I wanted to watch TV. I told my mom I didn't like him and thought he was weird. She smiled, said she agreed, and told me to head to bed. The next afternoon, I saw his ute parked outside again. His dog came running up to me, wagging its tail, and I saw John talking with my dad. Apparently, he'd borrowed some tools. He waved at me when he left, like he was a family friend or something. That night, he came back again to return the tools, and once again he was inside the house, playing guitar, laughing too loudly, staying too long. My parents argued after he left. My dad told my mom he didn't trust John, and that if he came back again, we needed to tell him right away. A few days later, it was Saturday. We were outside getting our inflatable pool ready when we heard a car roaring down the driveway. I ran inside, yelling that John was back. My dad stepped out onto the porch, already looking furious. He said, "Look, mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you coming here anymore. You're making my wife and kids uncomfortable. Just stay away, all right?" John tried to argue, his tone calm at first, but with this fake confusion that didn't match the situation. My dad wasn't interested. He told him to leave or he'd call the police. As he got in his ute and turned around, my dad said, "Don't come back, or you'll be sorry." That's when John's whole expression changed. He glared at us, not at my dad, but at me and my siblings inside the house, and shouted something before speeding away, gravel spraying against the wall of the house. A week later, our mailbox was smashed to bits. My dad didn't say much, but later told me he knew it was John. The next weekend, we came home from town and immediately noticed something was off. The window by the bathroom was missing. My dad told my mom to stop the car and stay put. When I looked, I saw him, the same man, crawling out from the window. My dad lost it. He told my mom to drive closer, but John ran down the back of the property and disappeared into the bush. Our dog, Millie, was barking like crazy, but she couldn't find him. Nothing was stolen, nothing touched, which meant we'd probably caught him right as he got in. The police came and took prints but didn't find anything. My dad told them about John again, but that was the last time we ever heard about him. Months later, school started up. I was settling into my new classes, meeting teachers and aides, until I saw him. The same man, except now he was being introduced as a teacher aide named Greg. I froze. He looked just as shocked when he saw me, his face pale and his eyes wide. I told my dad that night, and the next day he went to the school. The man had apparently taken indefinite leave, effective the same day I saw him. To this day, I don't know what his real name was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget that look on his face when he realized I knew who he really was. I think about my childhood outside New Orleans more often than I'd like to admit. It was the kind of place that sticks with you, full of life, sounds, and people that could make you laugh or scare you half to death. There were so many memories from that time, everything from good to bad, but some things just stay with you longer. I could tell you about when my neighbors thought I was the one sneaking around their windows at night. Their son swore someone was peeking in on him, and since I was the same age, about 13, I became the obvious suspect. It wasn't until they caught the real guy that my name got cleared. Or the time my dad got a $1,000 phone bill filled with adult hotline calls and immediately assumed I was behind it. After a week of denying it, he called the company and found out the calls were made while we were away on vacation. That was strange enough, until we realized someone had actually broken into our house just to make those calls. But neither of those moments come close to what happened in the swamp. Our neighborhood sat right at the edge of the Honey Island swamp, 70,000 acres of untouched, humid wilderness. Our house was practically the last one before the wilderness started. Out back, past the line of shrubs and vines, the swamp began. You could stand at our back door and hear the buzz of insects and the croaking of frogs coming from that wall of green. When I was a kid, I spent almost all my free time exploring it. I'd go out there with my old golden retriever, who was already around 14 at the time. He'd been with my parents before I was even born. He was loyal, always by my side, never letting me wander off too far without him. Bit by bit, I started pushing deeper into the trees, treating the swamp like my own little kingdom. By the time I'd been exploring for about a year, I could make it roughly a mile in any direction before the terrain got too rough or the water too deep. I'd gotten good at finding little dry patches and trails that no one else probably even knew existed. One morning near the end of summer, I decided I wanted to see how far I could really go. I packed a small lunch, filled my canteen, and set out just after sunrise with my dog trotting ahead of me. By mid-morning, I reached a part of the swamp I'd never been to before. The trees seemed taller, the air heavier. I came across a narrow stretch of shallow water covered in green algae that looked like it had been sitting still for years. It took me almost an hour to find a decent spot to cross, and by the time I did, my boots were soaked through. On the other side was a patch of dry ground under a huge oak tree, so I sat down to rest and eat while my dog lay beside me. It was peaceful, right up until I realized I didn't know which direction I'd come from. Every part of the swamp looked the same twisted roots, the same hanging moss, the same sound of wind through the branches. The sky started darkening, and I realized a storm was coming. The insects and frogs had all gone silent, and that stillness felt unnatural. I packed up and started walking in what I hoped was the direction of home. But after 10 or 15 minutes, I stumbled into a strange clearing. It wasn't natural. The undergrowth had been cut down, and tree stumps were scattered everywhere. But there weren't any signs of vehicles or paths leading in. The trees overhead were still thick, so the whole place had this dim, almost enclosed feeling, like being in an outdoor cathedral. That's when I started noticing bones on the ground. Small ones at first, then larger, maybe from deer or wild pigs. The smell in the air was off, like wet ash and rot, and in the center of the clearing, there were 3 wooden crosses made from roughly cut logs, lashed together and blackened from fire. I froze where I stood. The air felt heavy, and every instinct told me I shouldn't be there. Then the sky opened up, rain pouring down in sheets, hitting the ground so hard it bounced back up again. I started backing away, calling for my dog. He'd wandered off a few yards, chewing on one of the bones, but when I called again, he didn't come. I yelled louder to be heard over the rain, and that's when I saw it. A figure stepped out from behind one of the trees at the edge of the clearing, maybe 100 yards away. The rain made it hard to see clearly, but it looked like he was wearing a long white robe with a pointed hood. Even through the downpour, I could tell he was staring at me. He didn't move at first. We just stood there in that storm, me too scared to even breathe, him standing in the rain like it didn't bother him. Then he took a step forward, slow at first, then like he was about to start running. That broke me. I turned and ran as hard as I could. I don't even remember most of the path back. I just remember pushing through the vines and thorns, running until my legs were giving out. When I reached the green algae-covered water again, I didn't even look for a crossing. I dove straight in and scrambled through the muck until I reached the other side. I ran until I couldn't anymore, until the rain slowed and I stumbled out onto a 2-lane asphalt road I recognized. I was about 2 miles from home. When I got back, I told my parents everything. The clearing, the crosses, the man in white. They didn't exactly believe me, but they were worried about the dog. He hadn't followed me home. For nearly a week, we searched. I went out every day calling for him, hoping he'd find his way back. He showed up one morning, filthy, soaked, and limping. I ran up and hugged him so hard I could barely breathe. He was thinner, covered in dirt and scratches, but he was alive. When we brought him inside, I noticed something that made my stomach sink. His left eye was gone. The vet said it might have been from a stick or branch while he was running through the woods, and maybe that's true. But even now, I can't stop thinking about that day, about that clearing, those burned crosses, and that man standing in the rain watching me. It's been more than 20 years, and I still dream about it sometimes. It was early September, the time of year when the air in Utah's Uinta Mountains starts to cool, and the nights begin to smell like pine and frost. I'd been coming up here for years, camping, fishing, hiking, hunting, ever since I was a teenager. The Uintas always had this strange duality about them, breathtaking beauty wrapped in an uneasy silence. I'd never been anywhere else that felt quite so alive and empty at the same time. Every time I camped up there, especially in the wilderness zones where no roads could reach, I got that creeping sense that something was quietly watching from the tree line. Still, I always came back. The trout fishing was too good to resist. That year, a friend and I decided to hike into the Cubrant Basin for a few days. The fishing was supposed to be great, and it was one of the few lakes nearby we hadn't visited yet. The name carried some weight. Years earlier, a 12-year-old Boy Scout had vanished there without a trace. He'd just walked a few hundred yards from camp to change his socks and never came back. Hundreds of people searched for him, but they found nothing. I remember reading about it when I was younger and feeling chilled by how close that place was to where I spent so much time. I told myself it was just one of those tragic freak disappearances. But as we packed up our gear and loaded the dog into the truck, I couldn't help thinking about that story. The hike in was short, about 3 miles, and aside from the heavy packs, it was easy enough. The dog ran ahead through the pines, darting off the trail now and then to chase chipmunks. When we reached the lake, it was quiet in that almost sacred way wilderness sometimes gets, when even the wind seems to hold its breath. We set up camp, fished, cooked trout over a fire, and didn't see another soul for 2 whole days. It was perfect. It was on the hike out that things got strange. The trail back crossed over a kind of rocky peninsula that jutted out from the slope, maybe 200 feet up and over. On one side, the climb was steep and scattered with big boulders, and on the other side, it dropped down into thick pines and brush. It was the steepest part of the trail, so we decided to stop at the top to catch our breath and let the dog cool off. I remember thinking how silent it was, even for that area. No wind, no birds, just stillness. A few minutes later, we started heading down the other side. We'd only gone maybe 3 or 4 minutes when something made me look back up the trail. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing halfway up the slope, peeking out from behind one of the boulders we had just passed. The second he realized I'd spotted him, he ducked out of sight. At first I figured he was just another hiker. Maybe he didn't want to startle us, or was looking for something he'd dropped. But the longer I thought about it, the less sense it made. He wasn't wearing a backpack. He was just there, watching. I kept walking but turned to look again after a few steps. This time he was closer, maybe 20 or 30 yards down from where he'd been. And once again, as soon as my eyes met his direction, he ducked behind a rock. That's when I told the others. We all stopped and turned around together, and sure enough, we caught him peeking out again. When he saw all of us looking straight at him, he disappeared behind the boulder once more. It hit all of us at the same time that this wasn't just some random hiker. He was following us, creeping closer each time we looked away. The dog hadn't barked once, which was strange because he was normally alert out there, especially around strangers. That unsettled me more than anything else. We didn't say much after that. We just started walking faster, our boots crunching through gravel and pine needles, every sound behind us feeling amplified. I didn't dare turn around again. We made it back to the truck in record time, threw our packs in, and drove off without a word. Back home, I kept replaying the whole thing in my head. Maybe it was some weird prank, or maybe I just imagined parts of it. But everyone with me saw the same thing. The bald man. The way he hid when we looked. The way he inched closer each time. Later that night, I looked up the old news stories about that missing Boy Scout again. My stomach tightened when I realized something I hadn't known before. Our campsite was in the exact same spot his troop had used before he vanished. That was the last time I ever went near Cuberant Basin. There's beauty in those mountains, but there's also something else, something quiet and patient that's been watching for a long time. The summer of 2008 was supposed to be my first real taste of freedom. I'd just graduated high school in Oregon and wanted nothing more than to be out on my own, away from everything familiar. Hiking had always been my escape, especially the kind of hiking that took me far from safety, places with cliffs, bears, and long stretches of silence. I was obsessed with that kind of solitude. When Into the Wild came out the year before, it hit me hard. I must have watched it a dozen times, convinced that I needed to find my own version of that adventure. So I set out on the Pacific Crest Trail right after graduation, starting from the Mexican border and working my way north into California. By the time I reached Lassen National Forest, I'd already dealt with rattlesnakes, blisters, and the constant ache of carrying too much weight. But I'd also found a rhythm. Wake up, pack, walk until sundown, set up camp, repeat. I hadn't felt fear in a long time. That changed one afternoon when I rounded a bend in the trail and came across 2 people sitting on a rock. They looked completely out of place. Both were wearing almost all white, loose, dusty clothes that reflected the sun, and their faces were filthy, their hair matted. The man had a long beard, and they both looked like they hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. They didn't say a word when I greeted them, just watched me pass. Normally, running into people on the trail is a moment of relief. You talk about mileage, water sources, maybe share a snack, but not this time. I figured maybe they were just eccentric thru-hikers or trying to stay cool in the heat. Still, something about their silence followed me even after they were long out of sight. That night, I camped off the trail as usual, maybe a few hundred yards into the trees. I cooked some food and hung the leftovers from a branch, high enough to keep bears away. In the morning, it was gone. My first thought was that a bear had come through, but there were no paw prints, just 2 sets of boot tracks circling my campsite. One of them led straight up to the tree where the food had been hanging. That was when I remembered the couple in white. I packed up fast and got moving. The next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I started placing sticks around my tent each night, so I'd hear if anyone, or anything, approached. I slept lightly, half awake even when my eyes were closed. Then one night, I woke to the faint sound of those sticks crunching. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was an animal. But then I heard whispering, quiet, fast, impossible to pinpoint. It's hard to describe what that's like. When you're out there, miles from the nearest person, your mind plays tricks. Every shadow moves. Every noise feels close. But I knew these weren't animal sounds. The whispering circled my tent. Footsteps moved around me, slow, deliberate. I held my knife and waited for the tent flap to move. Then everything went silent. No wind, no whispers, nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun finally came up, there was no one around, but the same boot prints marked the dirt. A few days later, I was deep into Shasta National Forest, maybe 50 or 60 miles from where I'd first seen them. The trail had thinned into little more than a goat path, winding along the side of a mountain above the tree line. I stopped to rest and refill my water, and when I looked back across the valley, I froze. 2 white dots were moving along the trail far behind me. The same color, the same distance apart. That was the moment I decided I was done. I traced my map to the nearest road, a town called Castella about 25 miles away. I didn't even care that it was late afternoon. I just started walking as fast as I could. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, stumbling off trail into the trees to make camp. I set up my tent, too tired to think, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the branches, felt wrong. And then it started again. The footsteps, the whispers, the slow, careful movement just outside my tent. I sat there gripping my knife, waiting. Then a flashlight flicked on and lit up my tent from the outside, bright white for just a second, then gone. I unzipped the flap and shouted into the dark, trying to sound confident, but my voice cracked. I heard running, fast, uneven steps, and caught a glimpse of movement between the trees. I ran too. I didn't think. I just ran. My legs were shaking, my hands scraped against branches, my pack hitting my back with every stride. I tripped, rolled, and ended up next to a fallen tree. I crawled under the trunk, pressing myself against the cold dirt. The flashlight swept the forest a few times, cutting through the mist and rain, before finally disappearing. I stayed there for hours, until birds started chirping again. Only when the sky began to lighten did I crawl out and make my way back to the trail. I didn't even stop to gather my things. I walked the rest of the way to Castella with nothing but my pack and knife. When I finally reached the highway, I caught a ride to Mount Shasta and went straight to the police. They listened, took notes, and put me up in a motel for the night. My parents drove down from Oregon the next day to pick me up. A few months later, I followed up with the Forest Service. They told me they'd had reports of missing gear and stolen food in that same region, but no one else had described what I did. No whispering, no flashlight, no people dressed in white stalking campers through the woods. I never went back to the Pacific Crest Trail. I still hike, but not like that. Not alone. Sometimes I think about those two, wondering if they're still out there somewhere, waiting for the next person to walk around the bend. This happened more than 30 years ago, but I can still remember the fear like it happened yesterday. Back then, I was in college, taking an outdoor survival course. The final test was a 3-day solo in the wilderness. No tent, no food, no water. We were allowed a few basics: a knife, rope, matches, plastic sheet, canteen, small pot, halazone tablets, and a sleeping bag. The idea was to rely on what we'd learned, finding water, identifying edible plants, and staying safe. After being dropped off, I marked a tree with a flag so the instructors could find me later, then hiked in to find a place to camp. The first night went great. I built a small fire, listened to the woods around me, and felt completely at peace. The second day, I woke up thirsty and managed to find a muddy stream. The water tasted awful, but it was drinkable after boiling and using the tablets. I spent the rest of the day exploring, feeling proud of how I was managing on my own. Everything was fine until the final afternoon, when I packed up and hiked back to my drop-off point to wait for pickup. After about half an hour, I heard a vehicle coming down the dirt road, but when it pulled up, it wasn't the same truck that had dropped me off. The man driving wasn't anyone I recognized, middle-aged, scruffy, and staring at me in a way that made my stomach twist. He asked what I was doing there and whether I was alone. I forced a smile and told him that my friends were packing up behind me. He paused for a moment, gave me a strange look, then drove off. The second he disappeared around the bend, I knew I had to move. I grabbed my things and ran into the woods. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of his car coming back. My heart was pounding as I crouched behind some brush. I heard him get out, calling out and moving through the undergrowth. His footsteps got closer, then farther again. I stayed completely still until I finally heard his car start up and drive away. I didn't dare go back to the road. Instead, I just started walking, deeper into the forest, hoping I'd somehow find base camp. After what felt like hours, I stumbled across a forest ranger. I told him everything, and his expression changed immediately. He said I did the right thing. There had been a sexual assault in the area the night before, and they'd been searching for the suspect. Another girl from my class had also encountered a man the night before, but scared him off by blowing a brass whistle until help arrived. I was lucky, and I've never forgotten that. If there's anything I learned from that experience, it's to always trust your gut and never camp alone. When I was 18, I spent a lot of time hiking through the Cohutta Wilderness in Georgia. My favorite spot was a set of waterfalls deep in the woods, several miles from the nearest parking area. Most people never went beyond the RV camps or the creek near the road, so it wasn't unusual for me to spend whole days out there without seeing another person. One Saturday, I decided to take my girlfriend to see the waterfalls. She'd never seen one in person before, and I figured it'd be a good hike. About 15 minutes into the trail, she suddenly grabbed my arm and got quiet. She said she felt like someone was watching us and that she had a bad feeling. I laughed it off, telling her the only real threats out there were bears or the occasional snake, but she stayed uneasy the whole way. It took a couple of hours to reach the falls. We sat down to eat by the base, and after lunch, she pulled out her phone to check for messages. When she realized she had no signal, she started to panic a little. I told her that was the whole point. No service, no noise, just peace and quiet. That didn't calm her down at all. She wanted to head back, so we packed up and started the long walk toward the car. We were about a mile away from the falls when someone called out behind us. The voice startled both of us. When I turned around, there was a man walking toward us with a rifle slung over his shoulder. His beard was thick, his hat pulled low, and he had this look that instantly put me on edge. My girlfriend stepped behind me as he got closer. He said, "You guys left your cell phone back by the falls." There was this faint grin behind his beard as he looked at her. I forced a polite smile and thanked him, saying we must have missed it. Then I told him we'd just head back to get it later. He shook his head and said, "No, it's still sitting there. You should come with me and get it now." That's when I knew something was off. My girlfriend already had her phone in her hand. She never left it behind. I told him we'd manage without it, and that we needed to get going. We started walking again, faster this time, but he followed us, not close enough to confront us, just far enough to keep us in sight. He trailed us all the way down the trail until we reached the car. I opened her door, and she silently held up her phone to me, her hands shaking a little. That was the last time I ever hiked that trail.